Welcome to our Lightroom Masterclass for 2019. While we've done a lot of videos covering Lightroom editing over the past 2 years, this video is going to start from the beginning.
We'll assume you have zero experience in Lightroom, and we'll show you what you need to know in order to start editing the way you want, like a ninja.
We're going to keep it fast-paced as usual because we've got a lot of ground to cover and don't want you to have to fast forward to get to the good stuff.
And we want to thank our sponsor, Squarespace. With their help, we can make this video free for everyone. We are using Lightroom Classic CC version 8.2.1, so if you see a tool or parameter in this video that you don't see in your version, don't worry too much about it. The majority of this video will still apply regardless of what version you're using. When you first launch Lightroom, you'll likely be prompted to open a catalog or create a new one. We always create an individual catalog for every shoot, which helps keep the catalogs from getting too bloated, which can slow down performance. And if something were to happen, like the catalog corrupting, we won't lose months and months worth of editing. We also keep the catalog contained in its own folder within our shoot folder.
Before we get started with editing, let's take a quick look at the preferences. The General tab doesn't have anything too significant in it, but let's look at the Presets tab. If you click Show Lightroom Develop Presets, it will open the folder that contains your presets. If you end up buying presets, you'll want to copy them into this folder and restart Lightroom to install them. That's about as far as we need to dive into preferences today. Importing photos. Now we have a new empty catalog. Let's start by importing some photos. You can either drag and drop photos in here, or you can go to File, Import Photos and Video. We're going to start by selecting some photos from our last workshop. Generally, we like to pull our photo selects using a third-party application called Photo Mechanic. The reason we do this is because Photo Mechanic is far quicker at loading the previews of raw files, which allows us to really expedite the culling process. Since we have our selects already culled into their own selects folder, we can just import all of them. Anything with a checkmark gets imported. If you don't have Photo Mechanic, no worries. You can cull in Lightroom just fine, and we'll show you how to do that.
On the right panel, we can choose how Lightroom handles the import. For build previews, we usually keep it at standard. Minimal and embedded sidecar previews are only temporary, and Lightroom will automatically build better quality previews as soon as it can, so we'd rather just do it upon import. One-to-one previews will take the longest to build, but once built, they will be the highest quality previews that will allow you to zoom in on your photos with minimal lag. Next, we have an option to build smart previews. This is ideal if you plan on editing photos without your hard drive containing the raw files being connected to your computer. As long as your Lightroom catalog and the preview files it builds are on your computer, you'll be good to go. You don't have to have your raw files with you.
How smart is that? Those things are tiny.
I'll leave this unchecked for now. We can also add it to a collection if we want, which is really just a way to keep your photos organized. If you have a preset you know you want to apply to all of your photos, you can do that here, as well as adding any metadata to the photo. Feel free to do so if you'd like. Next, let's click Import. In the top left, we'll see progress bars as Lightroom works to import and build previews. We can start working right away if we like, or if your computer is having a hard time keeping up, just wait for it to build before continuing.
In the top right corner of your Lightroom window, you'll see all the different modules offered in Lightroom. We're only going to cover the first two, Library and Develop, because that's really all you need to know in order to become an editing wizard.
You're a wizard, Harry.
So Lightroom automatically starts us in the Library module. The Library module is ideal for organizing, rating, labeling, and culling photos. You can also do batch edits, add a preset, or make basic adjustments like white balance, exposure, etc. We can increase the size of our thumbnails by hitting the equals key, or make it smaller by hitting the minus key. We can also make it full screen by going to View, Zoom In. If you choose to cull your photos in Lightroom, go ahead and do that at this point. You can cull by flagging photos with the P key, rating photos 0 to 5 with a number pad, or color labeling photos with the 6 through 9 keys on your number pad. If you want to remove a flag from a photo, press the U key. If you want to remove a number rating, press 0 on your number pad. And if you want to remove a color label, just press the number pad key for that color to remove it. Once you've gone through all of your photos, marking the ones you want to edit, you can then filter your photos to show only your selects. We usually prefer to pick selects by using flags, so where it says filters off, we just select flagged. If you use another method or a combination of methods, you can just select that here. For instance, if you want to show only 4-star photos that are labeled red, you can do that. Now that we have our selects culled, we can dive into editing. For speed, you can feel free to make basic adjustments using the Quick Develop panel. We usually go more in-depth with editing, so now it's time to move to the Develop module.
Here we have some new panels. On the left at the top, we have the navigator. You can zoom in and out, fit and fill your photo to the window, and if you're zoomed really far in and want to move around, you can do that too. Below that, we have presets. If you buy presets or create your own, you'll find them all here. There's also a handful of presets that come with Lightroom, but we've never really found them to be very useful. Just click on the presets to apply them, or on newer versions of Lightroom, hovering over them will show you a preview of what they'll look like. Below presets, we have snapshots. If you want to A/B compare different edits, snapshots can be helpful. Just click the plus sign, label your snapshot, and hit OK. You can always select snapshots and all of your editing parameters will go back to where they were when you made the snapshot. The history panel shows the non-destructive power of Lightroom. If you start going down an editing path for a photo and you really don't like it, you can easily jump to the point in time before you went off the deep end. Last, we have collections. If you want to stay organized, feel free to group your photos into collections. Below that, we have copy and paste, which allow you to copy any settings from one photo and paste them to another. It's super useful and even more useful if you memorize the quick key for it. On the top right, we have all of our editing parameters. At the top is the histogram. This is a graphical representation of the tones in your image. If you hover over the different sections, it will show you where the most information in your photo lies. For instance, in this photo, there's very little in the mid-range and highlights, with the bulk of the information being in the shadows and blacks. You can also grab a section that you'd like to adjust and pull it to the left or right. This is the same thing as using the adjustment sliders below, but a more visual way of doing so. For instance, if we want to lift the shadows, we can grab the shadow section and pull it to the right. We can see that the shadow parameter down here moves with it.
Now let's move on to the tools below the histogram. First, we have our crop tool. You can use the quick key R to use it, or just click on the icon for it. You can grab anywhere on the border of the image to crop it. Moving farther out from the border, our cursor turns into the rotate tool if you'd like to straighten out your image. If you want to crop your photo to be a specific aspect ratio, you can do that with this drop down. If you want to straighten your photo along the horizon or another well-defined line, click the ruler and then click and drag along your horizon to straighten it that way.
Boom. Roasted.
Next, we have the spot removal tool. This works similarly to Photoshop's clone stamp tool, and we have the option to either clone or heal. Clone will precisely duplicate another region, whereas heal will attempt to blend it in more. When you use the tool, Lightroom will automatically find a region to replace your spot with. If it picks a region that does not work, you can press the / key to have it find another region to pick from, or you can simply drag and select a new region manually. You also have size, feather, and opacity options, which should be pretty self-explanatory.
Next, we have the red eye removal tool, which I don't think I've used since editing old film scans in 2009. Up next is the graduated filter. You can think of it as applying a gradient of whatever settings you choose from the panel over your image, meaning the settings will fade in opacity depending on how you draw the filter onto your image. We use this most often to lower the exposure in the sky or lift shadows in the fore or midground of our image. Click and drag across your image to apply the filter. Where you first click will have the strongest effect, and how far you drag your mouse will determine how gradual the fall off will be. To visually see a mask of what you're doing, press the O key. The darkest red part will be full opacity. The parts with no red will not be affected at all. You can move the brush around and adjust the feather of the brush just by clicking and repositioning. Also, on newer versions of Lightroom, you have the range mask option. This restricts your mask based off either color or luminance. It's pretty simple to get the hang of, and we have a video that will dive into more detail if you want to know more. Next, we have the radial filter. This is similar to the graduated filter, except that instead of drawing a line, you're drawing an ellipse. By default, the filter will affect everything outside of your drawn ellipse. You can simply invert the filter if you want to affect the inside of the ellipse. One cool feature that can easily go unnoticed with both the graduated and radial filters is this brush option. This lets you add or subtract from your mask with a brush, which can be really useful when you need to make more precise adjustments. Paint on any areas you'd like to add, or hold Option or Alt to subtract from the mask. Next, we have the adjustment brush. It works simply by painting on with your cursor wherever you'd like the brush to affect. You can use your mouse's scroll wheel to adjust the size, and hold Shift and use the scroll wheel to adjust the feather amount. You can also adjust the settings right here. If you have Auto Mask enabled, it will do its best to detect edges to keep you from painting outside the lines. Again, hold Option or Alt to erase parts of your mask and press O to look at your mask. The adjustment brush is great for lifting shadows on faces or making more detailed enhancements such as whitening teeth or softening skin. One option that both the filters and brush have is the color option. This adds a color overlay to your masked areas. We have an entire video about using this to change the color of anything in Lightroom, so once again, you can watch that for more info on how to use it effectively.
With the tools out of the way, let's move on to the basic adjustments panel. The first thing we have is the treatment option. You only need to touch this if you want to change the photo to black and white. Otherwise, just leave it as is. In newer versions of Lightroom, we have the profile option here, which allows us to load a color profile. We'll leave it as Adobe Color for this example, but again we go more in depth with it in our video on using LUTs in Lightroom. Next we have white balance. You can choose from presets. You can manually adjust tint and temperature, or you can use the eyedropper. When using the eyedropper, find something that should appear white and click on it. Don't click on blown out areas of the photo because it won't work properly. It doesn't matter what method you use as long as it works for you. Sometimes we'll try out auto and see if we like the adjustments. If not, we'll do it manually until our white balance looks correct. Quick tip. One thing to note with adjusting parameters in Lightroom, when hovering over the parameter, you can use the up and down arrows on your keyboard to make the adjustments. Holding Shift will make the adjustment increment larger for more drastic changes. Quick tip. Hold Option or Alt to show the option to reset groups of settings. Quick tip. Click the switch in the top left of the individual panels to turn off the adjustment completely. This is a good way to do an A/B comparison and see how exactly that panel is affecting your photo. Quick tip. Click the arrow on the right of each panel to close it. On newer versions of Lightroom, right-click on the panel heading and click Customize Develop Panel. Here you can hide panels you don't often use and change the order of panels to streamline your workflow. The next handful of settings are pretty self-explanatory. One thing we do recommend is try making highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks adjustments before adjusting exposure. A lot of times lifting the shadows may give you the lightness you need without having to make a sweeping change to the entire exposure. This is also a good way to bring back the detail and highlights without lowering the entire exposure of your photo. You can also click the Auto button to have Lightroom make automatic adjustments based on the information in your image. It's vastly improved over the years, and here it actually does a great job adjusting the tones to maintain detail. Next is the clarity slider. This will affect the contrast in the midtones of your image and can easily be overdone, so use it with caution.
Ow!
Increasing it will bring out more detail in your photo, and decreasing it will soften details. Oftentimes you can soften skin by using an adjustment brush on the skin and lowering the clarity. Once again, the key is moderation. Don't go crazy with it.
I'm not crazy, she's crazy.
The dehaze slider is a great way to add a little punch to your image. It's a mix of contrast and saturation and works well for astrophotography. If you feel your image lacks a little zhuzh, try adding a touch of dehaze and see how you like it. Vibrance and saturation both affect, well, the saturation of your image, but vibrance will affect the saturation of more muted colors in your image, whereas saturation will affect all hues equally.
Now let's talk about the tone curve. The tone curve allows us to more intricately sculpt the contrast and tones of our photos. You may notice the graph behind the tone curve line mimics that of the histogram. The black point is in the bottom left and the white point is at the top right. If we lift the black point, it will take what was pure black and make it darker gray. If we lower the white point, it takes what was pure white and makes it a lighter gray. So lifting the black point and lowering the white point effectively crushes the dynamic range of the photo, which when done tastefully can give your image a more stylized look. We can also add points along the line and raise and lower them to affect the tones in that range. For instance, if we want more contrast in the shadows, we can add a point here and lower it. If we want to keep the brighter parts of the image bright, we can add points along the right half of the tone curve and adjust the curve to make that happen. Now right now, we're just adjusting the RGB curve, which affects all hues. If we want, we can do even more specific adjustments to the individual color channels. For instance, if we want more magenta in the shadows, we could actually take out some of the green from the shadows. If we want more blue in the highlights, we lift it in the blue channel like so. If you don't like using points with a tone curve, you can switch to the parametric mode. This mode gives you 3 range sliders, as well as a slider for each region of the tone curve. This mode will actually work in conjunction with the point mode, not instead of the point mode, so you can use both if you really wanted. We tend to stick with point mode, as we like having the more tactile control over the points on the curve.
Next we have the Hue, Saturation, and Luminance panel, also known as the HSL panel. This gives us control over each individual hue. With the first section, we can decide how we want our hues to be represented. For instance, if we want the red hues to appear more orange, we can simply drag the red slider to the right toward orange. Conversely, if we want our reds to appear more magenta, we can drag the slider to the left toward magenta.
Quick tip, if we want to change the hue of our model's shirt but aren't sure whether we should grab the red slider or the orange slider, we can instead use the target adjustment circle to identify the associated colors. Click on the circle and then click and drag up or down on your target area. Here we can see it adjust the hues of both our red and orange sliders at the same time. You have to be careful making drastic adjustments this way, because we can see here it has a huge impact on our skin tones.
The saturation section works along the same lines as the hue section. If you want to mute a color range, simply drag it to the left, or if you want to make it pop more, drag it to the right to add saturation. The luminance section handles the brightness of each color. For instance, if we feel our model's shirt is getting too washed out, we can lower the red luminance to bring back some of the richness of the shirt. If you often struggle with getting good skin tones in portraits, the luminance panel can help. Grab the target adjustment circle and click and drag up on your subject's face to lighten it. As always, just be careful not to overdo it.
Now let's move on to split toning. Simply put, split toning allows you to add color to both your shadows and your highlights. For example, let's add some warmth to the highlights of our image. Drag the highlights hue slider until you get a hue that you think will work well in your image. You can hold down Option or Alt to see what the hue looks like at 100% saturation. Now we can take the saturation slider and add in the yellow to our liking. We can do the same thing if we want to cool down our shadows by introducing some blue. Lastly, the balance slider in the middle will define what constitutes the shadows and what constitutes the highlights. For instance, if you want to add the highlight warmth to more of your image, drag the balance to the right. If you want the blue shadows to be introduced into more parts of the image, as opposed to the warm highlights, drag the balance slider to the left. This really lets you fine-tune split toning to your liking.
Next we have the detail panel. Here we can sharpen our photo and utilize noise reduction. With sharpening, the amount will determine how much sharpening is applied, with 0 being none and 150 being way too much. Generally, somewhere in the range of 20 to 50 is a good starting point for most images. The radius slider defines the size of the sharpening area. The default value is 1 pixel. We leave this at 1 as cranking it up has never looked good in our experience. The detail slider will determine what edges get sharpened. The lower the value means only well-defined edges get sharpened, whereas a high value will sharpen finer edges. Perhaps the easiest way to visualize what's being affected is by holding Option or Alt while dragging the sliders. This will show you what exactly is getting sharpened. Finally, our favorite slider for sharpening, masking. Cranking the masking value up will limit what gets sharpened to the most in-focus areas. This adds a little extra oomph to help your subject stand out from the background. For portraits, we keep this number in the 80 to 100 range. For noise reduction, we can break it down to 2 kinds, luminance and color. Color noise generally happens in shadowy areas and introduces multicolored pixels in areas that should be flat color. For raw files, Lightroom automatically adds color noise reduction. You can increase the amount and fine-tune it if you have more severe noise. Luminance noise is monochromatic and appears grainy. You can turn up the luminance slider to smooth out the noise. Just note that you'll lose some detail when doing so.
Let's move on to the lens correction panel. First, we can check the box Remove Chromatic Aberration if needed. You often find chromatic aberration along darker edges that have a bright background. Tree limbs and window frames are probably the most common examples that we come across. It'll usually appear as pink or green lines along these high contrast areas. Clicking the checkbox should remove most of it. Next, we can enable profile corrections. If you're shooting RAW with a lens Adobe has created a lens profile for, Lightroom will automatically load the profile for a lens when you check this box. This fixes some distortion and vignetting caused by the lens.
Quick tip, we recommend enabling your profile corrections first before you start editing because it may brighten up your image a lot when it fixes lens vignetting.
If you like the vignetting, feel free to lower the slider amount from 100 until you get it where you like it. The distortion slider will allow you to adjust the lens distortion amount, but we always leave this at its default value. In the manual tab, we can make more drastic distortion adjustments. If you want to play around with it, click the Constrain Crop checkbox and adjust the amount slider. If you have more fringing from chromatic aberration that needs to be dealt with, you can do that here. If you have purple fringe, start by adding 5 to the amount slider. You can play with the purple hue range until the fringe disappears. You can grab the hue range in the middle to keep the range the same, but just change the hue. Or you can extend the range to include a wider range of purple hue by dragging the sliders out. Defringing works by desaturating the fringe so it's not as noticeable. But the wider your hue range, however, the more likely it is you'll end up removing saturation from parts of your image that aren't fringe. For instance, you can accidentally remove saturation from people's lips if your purple to fringe amount is too high and your range is too wide. You can also use the eyedropper to automatically set the hue range for you if you prefer. Just click the eyedropper and then click on the fringe. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, so we usually just do it manually. Same goes for the green hue. Add a little to the amount and adjust the hue if necessary until it's gone. You also have additional vignetting controls below.
The Transform tab is actually pretty powerful. In fact, we made a whole video about it, which you should definitely go watch if you haven't yet. This can really help those shots when walls or buildings feel like they're falling away from you. It can also help level out your shot and just keep things looking straight. If your photo has well-defined lines, such as a brick wall, clicking the auto button will sometimes work perfectly. Other times you may want to manually add lines, telling Lightroom what lines should be level and straight. We always keep the Constrain Crop box checked so Lightroom will automatically crop our image for us, instead of leaving a white border around certain parts.
We'll cover this one pretty quickly. The post-crop vignetting allows you to add a vignette to your photo. You can play with the midpoint, roundness, and feather to get it where you want it. Next we have grain. We like adding grain to our photos, but it's totally a personal taste thing. You can adjust the size of the grain and the roughness to get it looking how you like.
Alright, we're almost there. Camera calibration is something we talk about a lot. If you want to learn more, check out our past videos where we create Lightroom presets. To sum it up, each pixel in your photo has a red, green, and blue amount that makes up its color. Camera calibration will affect the RGB values of each individual pixel. Camera calibration is one of those tools that's easier to experience than it is to explain. We recommend playing with each slider to see how it affects your photos. Quick tip. If you want to compare your edit to how the photo looked when you imported it, hit the backslash key to see the before version. Press it again to see after.
Quick tip. If you need a more in-depth edit in Photoshop, simply click on the photo you want to edit and choose Edit in Adobe Photoshop. When you're done in Photoshop, just hit Save, which will automatically create a TIFF file and load it into Lightroom next to the raw original. Okay, now that you're familiar with the panels and parameters, let's cover a few techniques to help you edit faster. Once you've edited a photo to your liking, you may want to apply the same edits to other similar photos. There's a few ways to accomplish this. Hit Command or Control Shift-C to bring up the Copy Settings menu. Usually we check all boxes and then simply uncheck the boxes containing more specific adjustments for the photo, such as crop, spot removal, transform, and local adjustments. Then hit Copy. Go to the photo you want to apply the settings to and hit Command or Control Shift-V to paste the settings.
The previous button will apply all of the settings from the last photo you had selected to the current photo you have selected. Quick and simple.
Our favorite way to quickly apply settings across a batch of photos is to use Sync. Simply select the photo that's already been edited and hold Shift and click on the last photo of the batch you want to edit. Now click the Sync button or hit Command or Control Shift-S. Again, choose the settings you want to apply to your photo and hit Synchronize.
If you've developed an edit that you want to reuse time and time again, it's best to save it as a preset. Simply click the plus sign next to presets and choose Create Preset. From there, you can name the preset, put it in a group, and choose what settings you want your preset to include. A general rule of thumb is to leave white balance and exposure unchecked, as well as more photo-specific adjustments. This way, your preset will work best across a wide range of photos.
When you're finished editing, we recommend going through with a pair of fresh eyes to make sure your edits look consistent across the entire batch. To export, start by selecting all the photos you want to export and go to File, Export. Choose the location you want to save your photos. And if you'd like, you can have Lightroom create a subfolder to store them in. Then you can choose your file naming. You can create your own naming convention, which we often use when we want to keep a large amount of photos in sequential order. We just change the sequence number to include as many digits as our photos. If we're exporting 100 photos, we want 2 zeros before the 1 to ensure that the photos stay properly ordered. Everything else is fairly self-explanatory. You can limit the file size, and if you need to resize your photos, you can do that as well. For instance, if we're exporting a vertical photo for Instagram, we can set the short edge to 1080 pixels. We leave output sharpening at the default setting, screen, but if you're exporting for physical prints, change that here. For metadata, we just include our copyright only. We're not a fan of watermarks, so we can leave that option unchecked, and if you want, you can select an action to happen once your photos are exported. Then, just click Export.
My name's Rachel and I'm years old. I like extreme sports and I'm looking for a guy who can build a beautiful website fast. If you don't use Squarespace, you can't be first place.
What's up? My wife is gonna kill me for being here.
Did that just say you don't use Squarespace?
What's Squarespace?
Next. I don't have time for anyone who doesn't have time for Squarespace's award-winning 24-hour customer support. Did that just say SoundCloud rapper? Next. If he doesn't use Squarespace's beautiful custom templates, then he doesn't deserve this beautiful template. And also no SoundCloud rappers. Please tell me you use Squarespace.
Use it? Girl, I married it.
Alright, at this point you should have a good idea on how to navigate the essentials of Lightroom and have more confidence in your ability to achieve an edit that you love. There are, of course, more possibilities and specialized tools Lightroom offers, but this video should get you well on your way to mastering Lightroom.
Wow, that was a long one. Congrats if you made it this far, and if there's something you want to learn in Lightroom that we haven't done a video on yet, let us know in the comments.
Like this video if you liked this video, subscribe if you aren't already, and turn on the notification bell if you want to be notified anytime we post a new video, and we'll see you in the next one.
Bye.
Bye.